This is Cam Wyland, and you are listening to the 16th episode of the Wordplay Podcast. I've been laboring away at my blog tour, turning out about a post a day, and praying I don't get burned out in the process. Got the opportunity to work a bit on the Robin Hood Sleeping Beauty fantasy I'm co-authoring, and was quite gleeful to have all the writing of battle scenes turned over to me. Other than that, it was a peaceful week of watching autumn fall upon the Nebraskan Panhandle, and a quiet flickering of golden leaves. The Winning Wednesday prize drawing for the Behold the Dawn poster remains open until Tuesday, September 22nd, at 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time. To enter, answer this week's multiple-choice question: what was a scriptorium? A. A writer of religious texts. B. A room in a monastery for reading or writing. C. A preacher sanctioned by the church. D. The personal secretary of a bishop. You can submit your response using the form at the bottom of the left-hand column on my blog at wordplay-kmwyland, that's WEILAND.blogspot.com, or email it directly to me at km.wyland@ymail.com. Listeners of this podcast can also get a head start on the final Winning Wednesday contest, which features the grand prize of an autographed copy of Behold the Dawn, a poster, a mug, a keychain, and a pin. On Monday and Tuesday, I'll also be giving away 2 runner-up prizes, featuring autographed copies of the book. To enter, answer the question: a misericord was what kind of weapon? Be sure to check the blog every week for new winners and new prizes. Until then, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or complaints, please feel free to contact me on my website at kmwyland.com or my blog at wordplay-kmwyland.blogspot.com. That said, please enjoy this week's recording. Should you write for a specific audience? Authors write to be read. We write not only for ourselves, but to share our thoughts, our words, our stories with others. Unless we happen to be Emily Dickinson, we inevitably realize that our words will be read by someone other than ourselves, even if it's only our mothers. In short, we write for an audience. When we write our first story, who are we writing it for? What spellbound audience are we envisioning somewhere in the backs of our brains? Chances are the only audience you had in mind at that point was yourself, and perhaps your family. Most of us write that first story for no other reason than because we want to satisfy and entertain ourselves. At that point, we're writing almost entirely for an audience of one. But should we be lucky enough to grow our audience in the interim between story number 1 and story number 2, the simplicity of our focus has a way of evolving, and not necessarily for the better. As we add more people to our audience, not only will the pressure to perform multiply, but so will the pressure to conform to what we think our audience wants to hear. No longer are we able to please only ourselves. Suddenly we have a whole host of readers to think of, and naturally we want to please them. We want to give them exactly what they want, for reasons of personal pride as well as professional necessity. But the simple fact is that we can't please everyone, and when we start trying to please everyone, we'll very likely end by pleasing no one, including ourselves. Know your audience is a common tenet of all media. After all, if you don't know your audience, you can't give them what they want, right? Yes and no. Writing for an audience, instead of merely to an audience, means you're molding your artistic vision to please the whims of the public. You're risking the creativity and the uniqueness that only you can bring to your writing. When you catch yourself censoring a passage or altering the direction of the plot simply because you feel this is what someone else would want you to do, you're sacrificing the artistic gift that is distinctly yours. You weren't meant to write stories the way others would have you write them. You were given the gift of storytelling so that you might tell the stories you were meant to tell. It's tempting, particularly with a sophomore novel, to pander to what we think readers want. But if they loved your first book enough to become your rapt audience, then likely what they want is more of the same, more of you. Believe it or not, none of this is to say that writing with a specific audience in mind is necessarily a bad thing. It's essential to know your audience and to know what they expect from you. When, how, and if you decide to fulfill those expectations needs to be an educated decision. Also, we need to avoid the pitfall of thinking that just because our artistic vision is ours, that it's 2020. It's not, period. No one's is. Therefore, it's vital to obtain the objective influence of a select part of your audience. In their book, Writing Life Stories, Bill Rohrbach and Kristen Keckler suggest, think of your writing as a conversation with a reader, just one. 2 people intimate over a meal, say, or over a cocktail or coffee, head to head. What if your audience was not a huge room full of frighteningly various souls, but one single person, the king or queen of good listeners, always nodding in interest, always with you, and a genuine friend, always ready to question your logic? What if you started to think of your writing as a conversation? Pick a dear friend with whom you enjoy conversation and argument. Now picture that friend reading over your shoulder as you sit down to write or revise your story. What must change? Tailor your sentences to the needs of one reader, and you'll tend to make your work more accessible to all. Writing to an audience is one of the inevitable joys and frustrations of the writing life. We can't avoid it, despite its pitfalls, but we can channel it by narrowing that audience down to specificity.
Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, visit me on the web at wordplay-kmwyland, that's WEILAND.blogspot.com, and be sure to listen again next week.